So welcome to everyone. I'm Dr. Iris Reyes, an emergency physician at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania and the founder of the UPHS CHOP Alliance of Minority Physicians. I want to welcome you all to the inaugural Alliance of Minority Physicians Black History Month Symposium entitled What the Dream Means Now, Looking Back to Move Forward. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Alliance of Minority Physicians, it was an organization I founded approximately 10 years ago with a variety of goals, primarily to create a community for residents and fellows, trainees at the health system, both at University of Pennsylvania and also at Children's Hospital, to come together to have a support system really to help them thrive during their training years. It also serves as a recruitment, an organization that really thrives on recruiting, retaining, and promoting our physicians of color, and also to sustain the pipeline of those starting at the pre-med level all the way on to faculty. It's been thriving. I'm delighted to say we now have over 400 members in our organization, and again, I thank you all for joining us in our inaugural symposium. One thing that I just want to highlight today, it's a very important, unfortunate anniversary, and that's the death of Ahmaud Arbery, which actually happened 1 year ago today. It and many deaths like his, unfortunate deaths like his, really set the tone for this year, and really the need for institutions to really look at themselves and really explore what they could do in order to eliminate racism, at least start to change the tone. We've come to sort of accept things in life, and I think that it's incredibly important to really understand that much of what we've come to accept really is not acceptable. And his death clearly is one of those. One of the things that actually came out of that really is in our own medical school. The Penn Slavery Project highlighted the fact that Penn really has a lot to be to hold itself accountable for with regard to slavery. And in looking at our house system at the School of Medicine, the founder of our medical school, John Morgan, was a slave owner and used funds from friends of his in the Caribbean who owned slaves in order to start the medical school. This was brought to light, and it was made clear that this was not acceptable by the institutional leadership. And many potential candidates were looked at for changing the Morgan House name. And Dr. Nathan Moselle really rose to the top. He was the first Black graduate of our School of Medicine and went on to, as you can see there, establish the Philadelphia Academy of Medicine and Allied Sciences and Association for African Americans in Medicine, and established the Philadelphia branch of the NAACP, and really worked very hard with with colleagues in order to really improve opportunities for Black students and scholars, both at Penn and at other institutions. And on January 18th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day this year, the Morgan House was renamed the Moselle House for that. It's just extraordinary and overdue. I personally want to thank those that have agreed to speak tonight. I have connections to each and every one of them in a variety of ways. Dr. Zuberi, I met him at a dinner at the President Gutman's house many years ago, actually a year before I started AMP, and the comments he made during that dinner really kind of left an impression on me about the need to really not accept the status quo and really push for change when injustice exists. So I thank you for that, Dr. Zuberi. Dr. Jerry Johnson, again, one of my strongest mentors during my time at Penn, and I started there 31 years ago, and Jerry's been there longer than I have. But thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for all that you've done for me and for all the so many careers of people of color at Penn Medicine. And then Dr. Eugenia South, who graduated from our emergency medicine residency program, technically one of my mentees, but really has has just risen to the top with regard to her passion and devotion and dedication and just expertise and knowledge with regard to serving our community. And thank you so much, Gina, for taking the time to join us. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Angela Anderson, who's an assistant professor with the Department of Psychiatry. She specializes in child and adolescent psychiatry and is co-chair of the department over at Children's Hospital of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, serves as its PR liaison for mental health as well. And Angela serves on the executive board for the Alliance of Minority Physicians. And thank you so much, Angela, for agreeing to moderate this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Reyes, for your introduction. I'm honored to be the moderator for this evening's inaugural UPHS CHOP Alliance of Minority Physicians Black History Month Symposium. What the dream means now, looking back to look forward or to move forward. I'm sure many of us, not all of us, but many of us have spent time reflecting on the past, thinking about the present and hoping for a better tomorrow. Tonight, we are excited to hear from our panelists, not only about the objectives of this event, but how their own work and personal journeys have been impacted, past and present. Now, before I provide a brief introduction of each panelist, I would like to mention the structure of this evening's event. After I introduce the panelists, they will each have 7 minutes to speak to the audience about their personal reflections. Following that, the session will then be opened for a question and answer portion. And during that time, I would ask that the participants either write their questions in the chat box or use the Zoom hand raise function. And when your name is called, please come off mute to ask your question. Now, I will remind you of this when the time comes. After the Q&A portion of the event has ended, I will provide the audience with a few reminders, followed by me closing out the event. So at this time, I would like to introduce the panel in the order in which they will be speaking. I will say that my brief introductions of each panelist do not give due credit to all of the work each of them has done and accomplished in their individual fields and areas of interest. With that said, our first panelist is Dr. Tufuku Zuberi. He is the Lasry Family Professor of Race Relations and Professor of Sociology and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also lead curator of the Africa Galleries in the Penn Museum, as well as a filmmaker and a TV host. Next, Dr. Jerry Johnson. He is Emeritus Professor of Medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine. Dr. Johnson was the chief of the Division of Geriatric Medicine from 2003 to 2018 and project director of the Center of Excellence for Diversity in Health Education and Research from 1993 to 2016. Finally, Dr. Gina South is an assistant professor of emergency medicine, vice chair for inclusion, diversity, and equity in the Department of Emergency Medicine, and faculty director of the Urban Health Lab at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine. Welcome to our esteemed panelists.
Thank you.
Without further ado, Dr. Zuberi, I would like to ask you to start us off with your personal reflection.
Dr. Anderson, Dr. Johnson, Dr. South, Dr. Reyes, Dr. Flowers, and everybody who has taken this time out of your night to listen to us, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you a few of my ideas and to contribute to your inaugural event that honors and celebrates the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, activist Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I like that, you know, Dr. King engaged in his activities in many different ways, but was constantly on point with his mission. You know, in this speech that you just cited, he has part of one line is true meaning of its creed when referring to the United States. I think by the end of his life, he was really questioning what that creed was. And more recently, we've become very impressed with our own questioning of what that creed means. And it means very different things for very different people. And that has resulted in great division, great strife, great protests, and great changing of the boundaries of where we're at. I mean, I've spent the last 30 or so years, not as long as Dr. Johnson, but the last 30 or so years, I've spent, it's more of the so than it's 30. I know I'm on the other side of that now, but I remember when Dr. Johnson had all black hair. I'm not saying anything wrong with your gray hair. I can't speak about that, but you know, I remember those days. I was back there in them days when, okay, well, we're not going to tell all those stories right now, but I've been a professor. I have been a television host. I have been a curator of museum exhibits and galleries, and I have been a documentary filmmaker. And I have done all of these things in some ways because I have always sought a better understanding of how the structures of racism have shaped what it is to be an American, what it is to be a human being, what it is to be a citizen within this context. And I don't just study the negative part, but to show you that, I also focus on the struggles against these pernicious forms of marginalizing people because of who you represent them as. And for me, this is kind of all crystallized in a kind of a modern white logic that for me, I don't know for everybody, but it kind of tautologically reiterates the declared structural elements of humanity, citizenship, or personhood that has been racially prescribed within the destructive and creative impulses of modern racial capitalist formations in the last 500 years. And I have had to try to think about this and think about what I'm doing and how it fits with the actual projects that I have and how it fits with those projects I have about engaging with the world. And part of that engagement is with my academic side. And so academically, I still do demographic research. I still give lectures on how to appropriately use statistical analysis. A couple of weeks ago, I gave the same lecture to, not this lecture, but the same lecture on statistical analysis to the biostatisticians at NYU. In 2 days, I give another presentation, which is to another group of biostatisticians at Harvard about basically the same topic. And I say that to say that that's one range. And then there's this other range where I'm doing the curation of a museum exhibit, redesigning a gallery. And so I will try to, in the next 3 minutes that I got, to basically give you all a sense of how I make sense of the work I'm doing based on what I think I'm doing in life. So it's all very personal, but it in some ways is connected to the projects that I have and the ideas I have about the past. Because, you know, one of the ideas I have about the past is that by the time we arrive to now, you know, if you say that the now starts in the 20th century, I think that all the world had been reorganized around our modern systems of racial lines. Everybody from China to Japan to Africa to Brazil. And in this context, the racialized people, the citizens, and well, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a person, what it means to be a human being are kind of like captured within a debate about the narrative on what has happened in the past and how that situates us here now. Therefore, what constitutes social justice as we think about how we spend the resources on our future and what we do and where we go. Now, for me, intellectuals, and I think I'm among those intellectuals who at least part-time are social scientists, we have like, we've been a key group in this battle over what it means to be a human being. We have served singularly a very negative role in this process, so that the ideas about race being a socially constructed thing has been used in the social sciences to, for the most part, justify the racial hierarchies that exist in the society that we're in. Now, to me, it's been very difficult to explain this to social scientists alone, and more difficult to explain it to people outside of the social sciences. But yet, this is the task that I have occupied for myself. And so it starts at a kind of larger level, because I actually don't think it is in most of the practice of doing statistical analysis or doing the assignment of our collective historical memory, to which we can really attribute some of these shortcomings. But it is part of how we tell our national narrative. Who are we? And kind of to keep this idea, you know, nations and corporations, you know, in the US is no exception. You got to maintain kind of nationalist enthusiasm. You have to have loyalty. And this is gotten by a kind of systematic installing of a national narrative through what I call administrative regulation. That's constitution, censuses, and other forms of surveillance. That's my whole demography and statistics side. And then there's the educational system and the mass media. And sometimes I have a space in that. And, you know, and that's with fictional films, documentaries, news, and all of these other kinds of things, and museums, of which I participate in those ways of communicating these ideas about who we are and what we represent within the society. But I think that for the most part, and I'll conclude with this idea, because I don't want to go over my time, is that white supremacy as an idea, not white supremacy as if they actually exist, as if white people actually exist, as if white supremacy is something that is not in all of its forms pernicious, that white supremacy has hijacked what it means to be a person in the United States. Because you either in that bowl or you out of it. Nobody expected that a president could declare his white supremacy in every way that he could, and that so many people in the United States would still support his trajectory towards attempting to regain power or to maintain power in the United States. So the national narrative in the United States has been hijacked by white supremacy. And we have spent far too much time debating that. And it influences every kinds of institutions that we have. If you work in an institution and it is a structure, then if that institution has a legacy of producing racially distinguished outcomes, that is the structural racism. And how you kind of explain that is the explanation of structural racism. It's definitely not an explanation of the individuals who are being structurally racialized and suffering from that racialization, but it does at least, I would like to suggest to you all in my closing note here, it does kind of produce a sense of who we are and what we are talking about. And so even if you're trying to defend yourself from white supremacy, it is because of the relevance of white supremacy. If the structural racism exists in the institution and it appears invisible, that is in itself because of this pernicious way of articulating a national narrative, which makes us think that we can be citizens and have second-class citizens. We can be citizens and have mass incarceration. We can be citizens and have a judiciary which has been bent and turned against a specific community, which has resulted in the kind of situation that we have right now. So I've been trying to study those things. I've been trying to be honest to myself and even recognize some of the limitations that my old thoughts have had. And I really appreciate this new idea from the Black Lives Matter movement of enough is enough. I was going around here teaching my sons how to deal with the police. Now I was like, can I get a quick redo on this kind of thing? I mean, what's going on? Even with the circumstances I knew they were confronted with. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to conversation as we move to the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Zuberi. Absolutely. And I'm sure we will have questions later on for you, as well as the rest of the panelists. And so now we will turn to Dr. Johnson. And at this time, we welcome your personal reflection.
Yes, thank you. One of the advantages of going after a couple of other persons is you get some reflections from their reflections. And one of mine is that I actually could refer to what I'm talking about as how we balance struggle for social justice with our individual needs, particularly in an academic organization with the constraints that come with that. I'm also reminded when the comment was made about the slave-linked history at the University of Pennsylvania, a wonderful book called Ebony and Ivory. Some of you may be familiar with it. I forget the author's name, but it's about the linkage between academia in the United States in general, and it was widespread in slavery. And believe me, we're talking about all these institutions, starting with Harvard, but Penn was by no means unique in that regard. And then as far as my hair is concerned, I'm actually glad to have hair, gray, black. It's not going to be blonde. I'm not dyeing anything, but I'm glad to have hair. But I was reminded of a fishing trip with one of my grandsons, and for some reason, another person whose ethnicity I won't mention decided to look me up on the internet because he didn't believe what he had heard, that I actually had an academic appointment. But anyway, he pulled up my picture and my grandson saw it and remarked, "Pop, Pop, I didn't know that you had black hair." And I didn't even know my hair was turning gray at the time. But so let me go ahead with the reason why I was asked to speak to this group. Thanks so much for having me, all of you. But some of the lessons and the kind of viewpoints that I've taken throughout my career actually started when I was in medical school at Case Western, where I entered in 1970. And just to give a context, in 1968 was the first year that these major, predominantly white institutions started enrolling Black and brown students to any large extent. Of course, Howard and Meharry have been doing it all along, but that was the first year. So I come in 2 years later, and by that time, the context at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland was that it had only had 2 African-American, Black or brown students in decades. So that was the context. And the context in the city of Cleveland was one in which those social determinants that we talk about so much were severe. I don't know that they're less severe now. Housing, income inequality, environmental toxicities, I suspect that they may be as severe now. But 2 things stand out about those years at Case Western that carried over. One was, so I was interested right away as a first-year student in social justice and community organizing, and I became active, as Dr. Reyes talked about, working and forming AMP, and forming bringing the Black students together to increase the likelihood that we would all succeed. and also engage in community activities. And most of the students embraced that, and we had an active organization. But there was one student who I was close to, who was a junior, and I was a freshman and was kind of in the leadership. We were close and respected each other. But for some reason, this particular person would not work with the organization. His view was, I work alone. His mission seemed to be similar to the rest of us, but he just wanted to work alone. And even as a faculty here at Penn, I've known faculty who espoused to a progressive mission, but were not interested in doing the work that's required to collaborate with other people like you, and maybe some not so like you, to get the work done. I'm reminded in that I Have a Dream speech, one of Reverend Dr. King's sentences was, "We cannot walk alone." And I believe that it was true then, it was true throughout my faculty career. We cannot walk alone. And then there's the issue of what does it mean to go outside your academic career, your area of scholarship, into the social justice arena? What does it mean to do that and also survive in what can be a seemingly or actually hostile environment, if hostility is meant that they ask you to leave before you want to go? So, or they make your life so uncomfortable that you feel like you should go, whether they ask you or not. I started off, I'd say over a period of 40 years, the ways that I chose to meet that social justice mission varied, and it could vary for any of you. So at first, I was very active on the Student Standards Committee, maybe for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And then was more active, actually even before that, when I first started back here, I'm talking about 1977, the medical students at Penn were having some struggles just with graduation, with courses, with the national medical exam that all the students have to take. You know, so working with, and Horace DeLisser was still, I think Horace was a resident, Dr. DeLisser, that shows you how far back that goes. So we undertook these set of chores working with the medical students. And then I moved to Student Standards Committee. And I first I think I met Dr. Zuberi when I stepped outside of the School of Medicine onto the campus of the university at large and assumed a very stressful position in what was called AAA. And this were the Black students and faculty and administrators who had a university-wide organization. And the mission was to try to protect them, embrace them. And I distinctly recall several meetings with President Gutman that were stressful. So I think just recognize when you are working in the community on the social justice side that you have the opportunity to evolve over a period of years into different kinds of activities. What Reverend Dr. King said about this, though, was we cannot turn back. I think and we cannot wait, right? We cannot wait, right? We've been asked to wait, the founding fathers, Hamilton, Jefferson, and all of them. I mean, they talked about slavery back then and said, we need to wait, even define the number of years that we should wait. Said, we're going to address this in whatever year, we're going to address this. And they gave a number. But of course, when that time came, they passed it on, and then they kept passing it on and passing it on. But we cannot wait. You cannot wait on this, and you cannot turn back. So here's the question. So you have a balancing act. You have a balancing act between trying to meet your aspirations for social justice, however you want to define it, and also succeed here in your academic mission, one of which is to actually get promoted. That doesn't have to be a goal, but for most of us it is. I remember being kind of shocked when I started the Center of Excellence in 1993, and there was a woman of color who was in one of the departments, and I kept trying to find out what she needed for assistance to succeed here at Penn. And one day she was just real clear. She said, I'm just kind of rolling here because I like what I'm doing, but I am not trying to get promoted here. That's really not a goal of mine. So that was her context, but I think that was an atypical one. So you do need to think about, well, one thing about this balancing act. So there are kind of three arenas that you're working in, right? There's your profession, the organization you're in, there's the community, and then there's your family. And you're trying to keep all of those happy at the same time. And we're going to come back to that because I don't have time to address all of that right now. One thing that I want you to recognize about Penn, though, Penn is not the beginning and the end of the universe, right? There are other entities outside of Penn. This is not where the boundaries of the universe ends. And you should think about yourself as a professional and your expertise in a broader lens than Penn, right? For me, that meant I built a whole career in the American Geriatric Society. And if I hadn't been president of the American Geriatric Society, I never would have been chief of geriatrics at Penn. They would have just dissed me if I hadn't already had a national reputation. We'll talk about that some more later. What can you do for yourself? There's self-awareness. You got to develop your own skills, take advantage of resources. You need to know the institutional rules, though. I almost did not get promoted from assistant to associate professor and would have been forced to leave Penn. I came really, really close to that. Part of my problem was I came in, my view was I'm going to do good, but I didn't know what that meant in the context of Penn and promotion, right? I'm going to be an excellent doctor, an excellent teacher, and do good things in the community. And I was in the CE track, and I didn't have anybody to tell me anything any better. I actually did have one person might have been able to tell me, but he was a person of another ethnicity, and he approached me like he wanted me to be his son, and that just didn't work for me. So he probably could have been had a more influential career influence on my career if he had approached me a different way. I'm not saying it was his fault, it was just my fault, because I know I had an attitude like, I already have a father, so you need to just rethink your approach to me. So that didn't go very well. You need to know your environment. There's the issue of honest brokers. One of the big challenges in your environment, particularly nowadays, right? After George Floyd and that murder, and even white people are talking about institutional racism. I don't know if the leadership at Penn ever say white supremacy and say racism now, but for most of the time I was there, that word would not come off, would not roll off anybody's lip in authority. But now it rolls off a lot of people's lips. I think that's a good thing because it should be said, right? Now, what it means could be debated, but hiding from it is not helpful. But just because persons say that doesn't mean that they're honest partners in what you're trying to do. So how do you identify honest partners, no matter what their ethnicity may be? And I've had persons who presented themselves as if their mission was the same as mine, but they were clearly trying to undercut me, right? And one way that was defeated just because of other collaborators that I have. I'll just give you an example. So I developed a reputation all across the country for minority faculty development, student development. There are about 40 centers of excellence in the United States. I had one. At one point in my career, I got some private foundation money from the Macy's Foundation to further what I was doing with this federal money related to minority education and research. So the Macy's Foundation grant came to an end. Another faculty at Penn whom I knew well and who knew what I know and who had leadership at Penn decided to write a minority faculty development grant, go to the Macy's Foundation, ask for money, and did not mention my name once. I mean, that's just disrespectful. I'm the one who had the expertise and the scholarship. My name was not even mentioned. The person at the Macy's Foundation that they went to called me and said, who is this person? I'm not going to say what they really said, but I'll just rephrase it. Who is this person? And why didn't they mention your name? And I said, well, we could speculate about why they didn't or did not, but they didn't, and they should have. And so they just threw the grant away, said, that doesn't make any sense. You're going to send us a grant. First of all, we just gave Jerry Johnson some money. We weren't going to give it more money to Penn anyway, but if we were, you can't do that. You can't assume that this person does not exist. So that's one of your points. I think if there are two things that you want to think about when you're trying to assess what's going on around you in the institution is, are they willing to accept leadership from people of color? Right, that's been a historical issue in the struggle in the United States forever. White people not wanting to accept leadership from brown and black people. Even if it's about something that you clearly have more of a vested interest in and know more about than they do, but they don't want to accept your leadership. And the other one is not wanting to spend their money. You know, show me the money and not wanting to spend any money. So I'll just stop right there and make some other comments in regard to some questions. You need to be self-aware. You need to be confident. You have to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, you can forget it, particularly at a place like Penn. You can just forget it. So thank you, and we'll pick up where I left out later.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate your words about the past and bringing your personal career and experiences that you've had to the forefront. So I appreciate your reflection. At this time, I would like to ask Dr. South to talk to us about her reflections for the evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zuberi, Dr. Johnson. It is such an honor to share this stage with both of you. So I want to start with a quote that has encouraged me and really given me life during these 9 months since George Floyd was killed, and really summarizes my current approach to navigating equity and social justice in my career. This quote was part of a speech talking about freedom and liberty for Black people. So it says, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." And that was said by Frederick Douglass back in 1857. I love that because it could be said by someone today and holds the same meaning. So the truth about medical training is that we are generally not allowed to make demands. At least that was my experience of training. Once we decide that we want to go into medicine, we get on a very regimented path of pre-med classes or post-bac program, then medical school, where essentially everyone takes the same classes, and then during residency and fellowship, where your life and your schedule are not your own. You have very little say in anything that happens to you. The hierarchy is palpable at every turn. And over that 12 or 15 or sometimes longer year journey, we are trained to follow the rules and to conform to others' expectations. And the thing is, we're really good at it. For most of us, we're type A overachievers who thrive in the conditions that academic medicine has set up for us. There's very little room to make demands or to question people in power about anything, let alone equity and social justice. The problem with this, of course, is that with these rigid structures and hierarchies in academic medicine, there are hidden costs. And one of them, of course, is the perpetuation of the status quo, which advantages white individuals and disadvantages people of color, especially Black people. And there are too many examples of this to count. And these colorblind policies and procedures are examples, harmful examples of structural racism, many examples of which Dr. Johnson shared in his own career. On a more personal and close to home example of the costs to this is to us as individuals. You know, we get through our training and into a faculty position where often for the first time, we actually do have a little bit more latitude to make decisions about our careers and what we want to do, but it's hard to do that and break free from the mentality of doing everything that we perceive others expect of us. What all those years of training have taught us about how to be successful and what success looks like. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but I know that I have had to really wrestle with breaking free from those expectations of others, or at least what I perceive those expectations to be, that were really born in the rigid structures of our training in medicine. And this is particularly salient to me as I've tried to forge a career addressing injustice. So I bring this up because I was asked to navigate how I pursue equity and social justice in my career. And as I took time to reflect on this and decide what I wanted to talk about, it really struck me that throughout my training, while I've always felt pulled to do equity and social justice and anti-racism work, and I've been doing that in a variety of ways over the years, it was never something that was emphasized in my formal training in pursuit of becoming a doctor in undergrad or med school or residency. The message that I got, that we all get through what is said and taught and celebrated, and importantly, what isn't said and what isn't taught and what isn't celebrated, always seems to be that equity and social justice work is not valued, it's not important, it is not what gets you ahead in academic medicine, and it doesn't fit into the definition of success that we have been brought up to believe in. So a few examples of what I mean. Actually, some of these things were mentioned by the other speakers. So I can't remember one time in medical school curriculum where racism was discussed, where the word racism was even spoken, or that we learned about structural barriers that people face that impede health. We always learn that being Black is a risk factor for this chronic disease or that chronic disease, but we don't learn that it's not race that's a risk factor, it's racism. Of course, in today's time, there are people working to change this in our medical curriculum in 2021. Another example that has also been mentioned is, what does it take to be promoted at Penn? It's not equity or social justice work or any of the many permutations of what that could look like in an academic medical setting. There are people working to change that right now at Penn, again in 2021. A final example has to do with research and money. Academic institutions love NIH funding. And why is this? Well, there's many reasons, but one of them is that that funding comes with upward of 62% indirects. This is something I didn't know about really during my training. So for every dollar that of NIH funding that an investigator gets, the institution gets 62 cents. So if a Penn investigator brings in $1 million grant, Penn gets $662,000 approximately. So it has to do with money. There's also other things like reputation. The US News and World Report med school rankings are based largely on NIH dollars. So what work does the NIH fund? Health equity, disparity, social justice work is not it. It's a small piece of what they fund, but it is a small piece. That's slowly changing, but that's the reality. So we value NIH funding, but NIH funding does not value us or the work that we are trying to do in this space. Foundation funding is much more likely to fund this type of work, but the indirects are fewer. And so that type of funding is not valued as much by the institution. There are so many examples of this woven throughout the fabric of academic medicine, and this shapes our career decisions, the small day-to-day ones that we make on how we're going to spend our time and the bigger ones. So for me, dedicating my career to equity, social justice, and anti-racism work is an ongoing journey. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I want to share with you 3 things that have helped me so far navigate this journey to where I am today. That has to do with the program, with people, and then the killing of George Floyd. So I was fortunate enough to take part in the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program about 10 years ago. And that was really the first time in my training that it was celebrated and encouraged to work with community and community members to think about policies and policy-focused research. We learned concrete skills associated with equity and social justice because those are skill sets that are needed to do that work in a career as a researcher or a policymaker or an activist. This really helped to set me up for a career focused on neighborhood context, health, and safety, which is what my research is about, and specifically to develop a passion that I have around leveraging urban nature to promote community health in Black neighborhoods. This work aligned with my passion areas, and I had a few key people who really encouraged me and showed me that I could make a career out of this. But I also had many people who devalued this work, who told me it was fluff and that it would be impossible to fund, that I should choose something different. And that brings me to the second part of that journey, which is about people. You have to surround yourself with people who are on your team, who believe in you, who see you, and who have your best interests at heart, and stay close to those people. You have to shed the other people. My research mentor, Charlie Brannis, is one of those people. Iris Reyes, the founder of AMP, is one of those people. And I've had a few people who, after thinking that they were one of those people, but realizing they weren't, I had to get rid of them, essentially. They were detrimental to me and didn't believe in me. And so I had to cut them out. Sometimes you can't fully cut people out. It may be your boss. It may be someone who is necessary for your career advancement. But in that situation, it's good to recognize what the relationship is and isn't, and to minimize the ways that you have to interact with those people who are going to be harmful to you. Finally, watching George Floyd being murdered, literally watching him being murdered, in the aftermath of all of that, with national protests, statements of solidarity, and everything that came with that, really brought my purpose into laser-like focus. I realized that for me, the work of dismantling structural racism was so urgent, was such a life and death matter, that I really wanted to dedicate my career to that explicitly in a way that I had not really articulated before. I'm in the middle right now of a really amazing coaching program that is designed specifically for women of color in academia. And through this coaching program, I've really been forced to question the rigidity and the expectations and the definitions of success that I've grown up with in academic medicine. And I've had to ask myself, what is it that I really want to do, that I'm called to do, and how do I want to operationalize that in how I spend my time? And asking myself these questions has really liberated me to be bolder and to demand more from power, as Frederick Douglass said in that quote. So finally, I will say that there are consequences to being bold, to speaking out and to making demands of those in power. That's why Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress, because it is a struggle, and a struggle involves pain. And that struggle can have very real consequences, including job loss that we have seen happen to particularly Black women in the last few months over social media. It could have consequences of not being promoted and being passed over for leadership opportunities, for being publicly and privately shamed or slapped on the wrist. There's also a consequence to our mental health and our physical health. You know, the more we put ourselves out there, the higher we rise and the bolder we are, the more likely we are to experience what sociologist Elijah Anderson calls the end moment. He actually tweeted about this today in response to something that happened to one of my mentees, who's a Black man. He said, Elijah Anderson described the end moment as racialized disrespect that seems to come out of the blue when you least expect it, and says emphatically that despite what you thought, you don't belong. For crossing the color line, it puts you in your place, then blames you for your naivety and bad faith. Those end moment experiences happen more frequently to me the more I have spoken up and the more I put myself out there. So for those reasons, I hold no judgment for minoritized people who take different approaches in academic medicine to fighting racism and injustice. Some people speak out very loudly, others are more behind the scenes. Some people don't seem to engage at all, but still their very presence is a powerful form of resistance. One thing we absolutely cannot do is judge each other about those decisions that we make. I think I can safely say regarding racism that we all want progress. And like Frederick Douglass told us, progress does not come without struggle. I think we are uniquely positioned as Black and Brown people in medicine to enter into that struggle with full confidence, leveraging our skills, our experiences, and our passions to speak up and out and demand change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. South. Just listening to the panelists this evening, I've been in a state of reflection, hearing about not only the history that you all have mentioned, but the impact that all, everything going on in the world has had on your careers and even personal lives. And, from talking about our American history and how the past continues to influence our present, to your personal reflections. I'm so glad you all could join us today so that we can all continue to reflect on the work that we've done and how we move forward. So thank you all for your personal reflections this evening. At this time, we will now begin our Q&A portion of the event. And as a reminder, please add your questions to the chat box. And you can also use the Zoom hand raise function to indicate you have a question. And I will call on individuals to actually come off of mute to ask your questions directly to the panelists. And if possible, I would ask that whether you put a question in the comment box or you come off mute, if you can direct your question to a specific panelist or panelists so that we know who you would like to answer your questions this evening. So please do so at this time. In the meantime, I actually have a question for the panelists, if you don't mind. And so I'm curious, in light of ongoing systemic racism, police brutality, COVID-19, the list goes on, how do you each stay motivated to continue the work that you are doing? Any panelists can come off mute to answer.
Sure, I can speak to this. I've been engaged in the struggle for so long. Part of being motivated is just almost inherited. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in the 60s. Went to college. I was in high school and college in the 60s. So being part of the struggle is joyful. I mean, it's actually part of the reason I get up in the morning. The other reason is because I love my wife. That's actually at the top of the list. And then I get up because of social justice and my professional career. So that keeps me motivated, but that's highly stressful though. If not for the wife and love and family part, I don't know if I could do the other part, because this is a long run game. The social justice struggle part is a long run. You do have to be concerned about burning yourself out. Persons who run a 100-yard dash are not the same ones who run the mile. And the 440 or the 400 meters is the hardest race of all. And if you're going to run a 400 meters, you have to prepare for it and think about it a different way. So I think part of it, I'm motivated because it's habit and because I surround myself with persons. This is speaking to what Dr. South said. I surround myself with persons who have the same core values, and I really don't care too much about what the other ones think. It's as simple as that.
I had a different upbringing. I wasn't as old as Dr. Johnson was in the 60s. So, however, I did participate in the Black Panther Party's breakfast program and in their political education program. And I think, I don't know, but I think they were checking me for sickle cell anemia one of those times or a few of those times. And so that gave me a different perspective towards what I could do in life and what I could aspire to. Now, I used to be one of these track people that he's talking about, and I ran the quarter mile. I ran it all the way until I went to Speed
That
City
was tough.
at San Jose
Wow.
State. And the one thing I learned about that race is that it required strategy. Because if you didn't have strategy, you might run the first 200 meters too fast. If you didn't have strategy, you might run the third 100 meters too fast. But if you put the right strategy together for you, you could optimize how far you could get in the particular run. Knowing that, if it's Edwin Moses and Everett Lee in the race, you might not win. But if y'all know who those people are, that would have been an honor to lose to them. And I did. So I'm honored by that. But I had a strategy that got me somewhere in the race. And I think that, the question for me has always been, how do I engage in this struggle? That's why I'm here. That's why I became an academic. And how do I use my skills and my abilities to do that? Because for too long, we have been described as individuals who, even when we get the skill, we have less of the skill. When we demonstrate the ability, somehow we still have less of the ability. And so you're captured in that as a reality, which is grounded in the ignorance of some. Some people are ignorant and you can get them to change by giving them more information. Other people are ignorant and they're arrogant about their ignorance. And if you show them something that challenges their ignorance, then that will make them upset. Many people who profess and practice and engage in racism, they want to protect those institutional structures which were made to limit how much progress can be made in whatever we are doing. And they've been very successful at that. They've been extremely successful at that. And why we are now in a moment where we see the necessity to engage in the struggle. For the most part, institutions like the University of Pennsylvania are not seeking those people who want to come in and change the institution, not seeking those people who want to ungut the white supremacy on which the institution is based. And the institution is based on white supremacy. In case you didn't know, it's a Eurocentric institution. It was born in enslavement. It was born justifying colonization and the dismissing of the indigenous population. And it continues to operate in this way in the world. And so if you take the opportunity to struggle against that, you're already putting yourself against the main tide of the university. But we must do that, and we must succeed and excel in that space, because it's only by succeeding and excelling in that space that we set a model for others to follow. Because if you do it and you fail, then you're gone. And you don't have the opportunity of helping or resituating people in those particular places. And so the thing, at least I've gained from participating in this process with many other people, is to create institutional structures which stand in place to question the Eurocentric basis of the university, to challenge the structural racism which is just pervades every dimension of the university. I mean, one of the smartest things that Amy Gutman said was when she said, it's going to be difficult to find any institution in the United States that has any history. It's going to be hard to find that it doesn't have a direct connection to enslavement, because we live in a society that was based on enslavement, the society that developed its financial institutions on enslavement.
Thank you for
So
that.
I'm inspired by the people who fought against enslavement. I'm inspired by the people who fought against segregation. I'm inspired by the people who fought for Black power. I'm inspired by the people who fought for African independence. I'm inspired by the people who fought to elevate the status of Black people in Brazil. I am inspired by the people who did the same in Colombia. I am inspired by the people who fought to make Cuba a different kind of society based on their critique of how white supremacy has operated in those spaces. Those things I find great inspiration in. Those people who have fought to make this a better world, to change what it means to be a human being.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Dr. South, how have you stayed motivated to continue the work that you are doing?
I think there's two things. One is looking back, and just like he just said, the people who have done this work before, this work is not new, and knowing it's not new and knowing that we can learn from people in the past motivates me. The other thing that motivates me is my kids, is looking into the future. I have 3 little kids, and after George Floyd was killed, I'm sure they overheard many things that were being said in my house. And my daughter asked me, who's 4.5, asked me, can the police do bad things? And I had to sort of decide in that moment, is this the time that is this when I'm gonna tell my kids and break it to them that the world is an unjust place? And so I did. We started to have that conversation. I said, yes, the police can do bad things and they do hurt people sometimes. And that has led to a series of discussions about race and racism in the world and what it means to be Black in the world. And every time I have those conversations with my kids, it motivates me to keep doing the work I'm doing, so that I can leave them with something that they can then pick up and continue that work and that struggle.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering that question. We have a few questions in the chat box, and the first is a question for you, Dr. South. The question is, we often hear you can't be what you can't see. While I do know Black physicians, I've never worked with one directly. All of the attendings I work with are white, and there's only one Black attending in my division of 60 physicians. How do you find mentors when they are not in your field?
Yeah, that is such a hard situation to be in, and is so sad, quite frankly, that in this day and age, you can have a group as large as 60 physicians and there's only one Black physician in that group. Mentorship is so important. It is really the only reason why I've gotten to where I am today. And so I encourage you to seek out and be proactive in finding the mentors that you want, whether that is at the institution or even outside of the institution, whether it's within medicine or outside of medicine. So if there are people that you have come across, whether that's speaking or people who interact with your department who you don't directly work with, email them. And most people, if you email them and say, I'm interested in learning from you and talking with you, most people will write back and say yes. And so, especially if you're at their institution. So I encourage you to proactively reach out for the mentors that you want.
Can I make a comment about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think that this is just building on what Dr. South said. You clearly have to look outside your own primary unit, outside your division to the larger department, outside the department to the university as a whole, from outside the School of Medicine to another school. I mean, some of the most successful faculty that I know have had mentors at LDI or in another center, persons in medicine whose primary mentor has been in the School of Nursing. And sometimes you have to, you have to get over your ego in order to do that, if that's a problem for you as an individual. But go outside your primary unit, and clearly sometimes you need to go outside Philadelphia altogether. depending upon your area of scholarship. The other thing that's implicit in what was said was this, how to even think about mentoring, right? So you have types of mentors. First of all, you can have too many mentors. You don't need 16 mentors because they're not, you might have 16 role models, but they're not really all mentors. That's too many. But you do need someone who's general, who can guide you and help you work through the system that you're in. And then you need what I like to think of as a content mentor who's technically expert in your area of scholarship. That clearly may be someone, if you're looking for somebody who looks like you, that may be someone who is in another institution.
Thank you for that, Dr. Johnson. So we have another question that I will say, Dr. Johnson, this might be a good question for you to answer, but any of the panelists, feel free to chime in. The question is, can anyone point to some best practice models for medical students in particular to thrive in the midst of institutionally racist practices, i.e. continuing to implement curriculum that may not teach or include cultural humility and or other culturally conscious lessons?
I don't think there's any one institution that I would call best practice. I think what you want to do is look across institutions and try to take what seems to be the best from each of those. In the Northeast, for example, the University of New Jersey School of Medicine in Newark has some models that I think Penn could imitate. UCSF and Stanford have been very progressive. So I think what you have to, I don't think there's any one institution that's best practice, because you're talking about, the arena is so broad here. Medical student education, residency, faculty, students. To what extent are we talking about working with communities and community organizations? Bear in mind that most of the institutions in its own public relations, including Penn, will overstate what it really does and how well it, I mean, they're just not being honest. They are overstating what they do. Some of it is for funding, and some of it is because they just not the most honest persons. So I don't have a simple answer for that. I think what you could do, if you had questions about any particular area, because there's so many, I'll just mention one, for example. What is a good best practice for medical students to engage with the surrounding community area, the area around this medical school? You know, I don't think Penn is best at that. I think there's some other models for doing that, but then there could be another arena where Penn might be better. I'd be curious how others think of that. That's a very good question.
Would any of the other panelists like to respond to that question?
I think not.
I guess not. Well, we have plenty more questions, so that's all right. So this next question, I would say, would be for any of the panelists to answer. The person wrote that, how do the panelists feel we can continue to take advantage of the momentum? And then they talk about institutional support. So one example would be at Penn, as well as at CHOP, now having vice chairs of diversity, equity, inclusion, but not just specific to Penn Medicine or UPHS or CHOP, or even just at Penn, the university. Can any of you speak to how, again, how we continue to take advantage of those institutional supports currently?
I would just say something which is not specific, but general as a strategy, is when you receive institutional support to fight against structural racism, you need to institutionalize that support. That is, you have to seize the moment where where you see this institutional support at currently, that you take that institutional support and you figure out how it becomes institutionalized, and then you use that institutional support to foster giving it a more kind of permanent place within within the particular place. Because, you know, a lot of times they do this, and some of this money is becoming to cool everybody out. It's like, just give them something, make it visible, and then they'll chill out and we can ride this out and get back to the good old days. And so one way to kind of shock the system is to get the system to actually support structures which are not going to do that. They're, by their very purpose, they will be contentious and they will be asking for a resolution of the barriers that exist. And so whether that is institutionalizing, for example, a conversation like this every year, you know, I know this is the inaugural event, but institutionalizing that and just going into kind of what other kinds of things might you gain from having a lecture like this? I mean, and how does that tie into service in the community? And are there ways that you can use their enthusiasm for, say, supporting an event like this for institutionalizing a process which addresses the issues that have been raised on this committee? So I would say the big thing you want to do to take advantage of institutional support is convert it into something that's more long-term. So not a one-year thing, not a 5-year deal. If they offer you 10 years, just scoot that up to 20. And, you know, and then you begin to get something which goes beyond you and goes beyond your own particular considerations and allows other people to take advantage of it and grow it as well.
So I think you want to be also astute about how you think about what you're asking for. So you're asking for policies and you're asking for funding. You're asking for both. So don't be fooled if you get one without the other, because they're both important. I have known instances where when it comes to individual faculty, I've been able to support a faculty with money from a grant that I would give to another department, but the chair of the department would not even take it because of policy reasons, knucklehead policy reasons, backwards policy reasons. So it's both. You want to make sure the structures are what I'm calling the policies, or what Kendi might call policies, and how to be an anti-racist, same thing. You want to have the policies and the programs align with funding, with hard money, not soft money. The type of money makes a difference too. Soft money meaning grant money that has to be competed for every 3 to 5 years. That's a lot different from a 10 to 20-year commitment of hard money, where the institution has a guarantee behind the money.
I would add that we have to keep agitating and keep asking questions and not being satisfied with where we're at right now, because it can be easy to say, oh, we got XYZ. We probably got more in the last year than we've gotten in the 10 years before that because of the times we're in, but that doesn't mean we settle. It actually means we have to work harder and push harder. Part of that institutionalization of these changes is building in accountability structures that link to money and link to actual consequences for people in power if they don't, for example, reach certain goals or certain targets. And then we have to really get at the root of all of this, which is around money and around power. And we have to ask for things and push for things that are going to shift power and money to be more equitably distributed within the institution, but then also outside of the institution for the people that we are trying to serve and work for.
Thank you all. Now we probably have time for about 2 more questions, and we definitely have 2 more questions. So one of the people in the audience mentioned, Dr. Johnson mentioned that some people pretend to be allies, but really are now down for the cause. How do you navigate them or other roadblocks to move the mission forward?
So we all have to work hard to look for collaborators. We cannot go alone. So you just don't try it. It's not a winning long-term proposition. And when I say go along, I don't just mean the mentors, but persons at your own level. I'll give you an example. I mean, there are persons who benefit from the work that AMP does who probably don't want to work with AMP or do the work that's required to keep AMP successful, but they're still benefiting from it. So but the persons in leadership in AMP need a support system around them. I think the big challenge for me has been trying to determine as quickly as I can who are those who admittedly by their own admission are outside our group, our minority group, but say they have the same interests, and which of them are honest brokers and which are not. And sometimes it takes time to figure that out, but action speaks louder than words, and you're trying to examine what the core values are. Ask yourself again whether these persons can they take leadership from Black and brown people, and are they willing to put their money where their mouths are? And that's a good way to start cutting out persons. But sometimes you just learn by trial by fire. I've had persons who I thought were colleagues, but when it came to a grant, they said, well, we're going to do this grant in the Black community, but I have to be in charge of it, even though I don't know anything about West and Southwest Philadelphia, but I want to be at the top. And so you have a fight about it, and one of you wins. I'm being a little cynical here, but I mean, a lot of this is about struggle, right? Actually, when I was thinking about this presentation, one of the points I wanted to make, if you're committed to struggle, then you have to expect to lose some battles. You're not going to win them all. So don't be discouraged about that. If you're going to get in the ring, you're going to get hit. If you're afraid to get hit, then you really should not expect to last long in a fight. That's not going to happen except in the movies. So expect some resistance. Be willing to take some blows. Have confidence, though, that you're going to win because you're tougher and smarter. And that's it.
I would, I love that answer. And I would add to that two things. One is to seek counsel when you're dealing with people who flip-flop on you. There are a lot of people who have dealt with that. Everyone has dealt with it. And so getting counsel from someone who is outside of the situation can help to make sure whatever situation you're in, that you're not letting your emotions drive you to do something that you will regret later. And the other thing is support from peers. And so it's again about people and surrounding yourself with people. They're surrounding yourself with the mentors who are going to support you, but then you also need your peers who are at some similar stage to you that you can, have your group text with to talk about the crazy things that happen to you every day with the people who say they're your allies and they're actually not. That helps to buffer against the burnout and the stress of being a Black or brown person in a predominantly white institution.
Thank you for that.
Real quickly, I think one of the most difficult challenges is when this person that we're talking about, who is an ostensible ally, is someone who is in a position of power and authority over you, right? So that person has authority, they have power, they're supposed to be maybe a mentor for you, but they have some control over your life, and you don't think that they're acting in your best interest. And then what I think you need to do is look for someone who has equivalent power and authority who can help you deal with that person, because you really are you're at a disadvantage there, a significant disadvantage.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Zuberi, this may be our last question. I wanted to see if you had any final comments on that question.
Well, I mean, I yield to the specifics of what my colleagues have mentioned because they lived that life. But because, you know, I mean, from where I'm standing, I've had so many, I was at a conference a few years ago that was organized by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. And so I was on a panel with a guy named Charles White, who's a philosopher. I think he's somewhere. I think he just moved from Northwestern or something like that. But it came up with a term, or they introduced us to this term. It could have been used other places, called frenemies. And what they meant by frenemies were these people who ostensibly looked and felt and sounded like a friend, but everything they did was the same as an enemy would do. You know, so we came to the conclusion that the first thing you have to do is disabuse yourself of frenemies, because they look just like a friend, they smell just like a friend, and their coffee tastes just like they're friendly. And if you drink wine with them, it's some of the best wine you can get. But at the end of the day, they're trying to undermine what you're doing. And so you have to really get space from the frenemies. And then another thing I'd like to say is that the difference between checkers and chess is chess, you just do, I mean, checkers, you just do tit for tat. But with chess, you can actually think about 5 or 6 moves down. And in doing that, sometimes you need to take a loss in order to get the gain at the end. And the way you do that is by having a better situation, better understanding of the situation, the circumstances you're operating in, and how it works. So having institutional knowledge is sometimes very important. Once we advocated creating a Department of Africana Studies, even though we knew all the faculty were going to vote against it. But we knew that by putting it out there, it would have a ripple effect, and that pretty soon, you know, sometime, it took about 10 years, but then you got your department. So, you know, sometimes you got to make sure you're playing chess rather than checkers, and get into the advanced thing more than chess, get into boxing. I like the whole boxing thing too. Although the chess metaphors are more powerful, I think, you know. Might think about that, Dr. Johnson.
I will the next time I'm playing chess.
Thank you, Dr. Zuberi, and thank you all. Now, before I get to the closing, where I thank the panelists, and because we want to make sure we give you all of the updates I mentioned initially in the session, we're going to, if you all can see the slides. Mm-hmm. So I want to mention a few upcoming events and opportunities. So the first opportunity, so make sure all of you on the call today, if you are able and willing, and it is something you can do, we need people to volunteer to vaccinate, in particular, anyone who is Spanish speaking, who can help us with this, please sign up. There's a QR link there, but if you have any questions, please reach out to Dr. Diana Montoya Williams. Her email address is listed there. We have another upcoming event tomorrow, COVID-19 vaccination, learning from our past, educating our future. We also have 2 featured AMP members, as well as Dr. Jessica Fowler, who's one of the lead AMP executive board members. So please make sure you attend that event if you are able. We get to our last slide. If you have anything going on, whether you're at Penn, you're at CHOP, Any of your accomplishments, we want to know about them. So make sure to email us with AMP at the Gmail account listed, and also follow us on social media on, I believe it's all platforms, but definitely Twitter and Instagram. So follow us there. And lastly, before I thank our panelists, in the words of the late Rep. John Lewis, never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So with that said, on behalf of the UPHS CHOP Alliance of Minority Physicians, I would like to personally thank our esteemed panelists, as well as you all on the call, our guests for this evening's inaugural UPHS CHOP Alliance of Minority Physicians Black History Month Symposium, What the Dream Means Now, Looking Back to Move Forward. Thank you all. And again, our panelists, we are so grateful for you being here this evening. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Take care and make sure to join us at our future events.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Wow.
much.